Thank you for joining Baby Basics, everything you need to know about your newborn. We have a few items before we begin. If you have additional questions, there is a Q&A feature located at the bottom of the screen. We will do our best to answer as many as we can. Following this webinar, we will be sending out a link to the presentation as well as share other useful resources. So again, we want to thank you for joining us, and now I would like to introduce you to Dr. Carrie Fierstein from Allied Physicians Group, who will be leading our discussion this evening. Dr. Fierstein?
Hi, everyone. Can you see me, Brie? Because I can't see me.
Yep, I could see you.
Okay, I still see you, but that's good. Welcome, everybody, to Baby Basics from Allied Physicians Group. Congratulations. If you're here tonight, it's likely because you have a newborn in your future. So congratulations. It's very exciting to have a baby. It's a time of all kinds of possibilities. It's also very scary. So many decisions to make. You want to do everything right, but how do you know what is right? So I'm Dr. Carrie Fierstein, Chief Executive Officer of Allied Physicians Group. These are the people you're going to be meeting tonight. I am a practicing pediatrician for 30 years. I am I'm mother of 3 and grandmother of 1. So we've made this a tradition so far because we started this during COVID, and he was born on March 29th. So this is what you guys are working towards. And he is now 7 months old, and he's very, very fun, right? We have a whole series, by the way, of baby basics that we've done, the 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month, 6 month exam, how to start solids, how to sleep, how to swaddle, all on the Allied Physicians education site. So you could see him again if you'd like, just check out our education page. And the best thing about being a grandma is we get to say good night, and here you go, Mama, you're in charge. So one of the best things you've done is you found a place to get trusted information. There are so many places to look on the internet and so many different viewpoints. It's really hard to know what to do. So being at a good pediatrician's office, and even if you can't be at an Allied office, just knowing that you can come to our website, see what we say, learn about different things, that's half the battle. So tonight, you're going to hear from 3 different pediatricians in 3 different groups on different topics of baby basics. We're going to answer a lot of the questions you submitted in advance. We'll also be answering questions as the presentation goes on. And then at the very end, anything we haven't gotten to in the chat, we'll try and pick up at that point. So at this point, I'm going to ask my pediatricians to introduce themselves. So Dr. Lemma, can you tell everybody who you are?
Hi, I'm Teresa Lemma, and I've been a pediatrician for many, many years. I currently practice out in Staten Island, New York.
Thank you. Dr. Geller?
Hi, sorry, just unmuting myself. I'm Adina Geller. My practice is Pro Kids Pediatrics in Levittown, New York. I've been there for 13 years. I have 2 kids, 13 and 11, but I remember the newborn days very well.
And Dr. Levine.
Hi, I'm Eric Levine. I'm a pediatrician for close to 30 years in Westchester, New York.
Excellent. Who's starting us off today?
I believe it is, I am starting. Yes?
Yeah, I think
Great.
so.
Yeah.
Bree, can we have the first slide?
Okay, so we're going to talk about feeding, which is a big one. And everybody seems to have an opinion on what you should and should not be doing, whether it's your mother, your mother-in-law, grandma, your neighbor, or the internet. So let's just talk about some basics of what you should know. First, hunger cues. How do you know your baby's hungry? Well, they may be rooting, like turning towards the breast or the bottle, sucking on things, putting things in their mouth, Or they may be crying initially because that's sort of the natural instinct when they need something, whatever it might be. In terms of what you're feeding your baby, breastfeeding certainly has benefits that we know of, but formula feeding is certainly a totally fine option, and we can help you determine what works best for you, because nursing, some women want to do it, it works out and it's great. And we also do at Allied have a lactation consultant who can do a virtual visit with you if you have any questions or concerns that you would like more advice. Some moms don't want to breastfeed, and that's totally fine as well. And we can help guide you through the process of deciding, which formula and go from there. And some will do a combination, and any of that is fine. The most important thing is that it works for you and it works for your baby. And a happy mom is very important for a baby. And so no one should pressure you into doing something that you're not comfortable with, and we'll be there to guide you and help you make sure that the baby's getting enough. So that's the next question here, right? How much? How do I know if she's getting enough? So I always tell parents that the baby did not read the textbook. So there is no answer for every baby as to how much should this baby be getting. But there are some general guidelines based on, what's average. So, for nursing babies initially, the milk can take a little bit of time to come in, and they're not necessarily going to be getting that much at the beginning, and that's okay. That we expect them to lose some weight initially, and we're going to monitor to make sure that, after a few days, the weight is stable and does start to go up. And sometimes it can take up to 2 weeks for those babies to regain the weight and get back up to birth weight. In terms of formula or pumped milk, they'll start with a very little amount in the hospital, and then nurses there will guide you, maybe half an ounce or an ounce at most. But then you'll see very quickly they grow so fast, they're going to start wanting more. And so how do you know when they want more? Well, when they're finishing every last drop of the bottle and maybe still looking for more, that means next time put some more in, see how they do. If they're suddenly going from eating every, 2 to 3 hours to being hungry again after an hour, maybe they need a little more next time. And so put a little more in and see how they do. If they don't take it, they don't take it. They take a little too much and they spit up, that's okay too. You just have to sort of follow their cues and go with the flow. It's an ever-changing experience. How do you know that the baby's getting enough? Well, there's many things that we look out for. Firstly, it'll be after the first day or two, we're looking at wet diapers. Usually you'll see at least 6 wet diapers in a day. And they make those nice little diapers with the strip that turns blue, which makes it very easy to tell. And we also look at the bowel movements. So, the first day, the bowel movement is really going to be just the meconium that they had in utero, and it's going to be this thick, tarry, goopy black stuff. But then once they start ingesting the food, you're going to see the poop turn into more of a mushy or watery or seedy type of a texture. And that's a good sign that the baby's getting the food in. The poop can be yellow, green, brown. It doesn't really matter. But it's a good sign that the baby's starting to process some food. And then, of course, we're going to monitor for the weight gain. Like I said, we expect some weight loss initially, and that's normal. And we will follow your baby to make sure that at the appropriate times, he or she is gaining the right amount of weight. And that is how we know that the baby is getting enough calories. Okay, next slide. Okay, sleep and SIDS. Okay, so let's talk about SIDS first, because that's like the nightmare scenario, right? It stands for sudden infant death syndrome. Unfortunately, it is very, very, very rare. And since the early 90s, when the American Academy of Pediatrics started recommending the back to sleep program, which means the babies should sleep on their backs, the incidence has gone down even more so. And so that is why we always recommend the baby should be sleeping on its back rather than stomach, which I'm sure your grandparents or your parents are going to tell you is how they were told to do it at the time. But we can see from the data that this significantly decreases the risks of SIDS. Now, what about the sleep environment? So you want the baby to be in his or her own, bassinet or crib. At the beginning, preferably in your room. It's just easier anyway. You're going to be feeding the baby, every 3 hours on average. So it's certainly easier to have the baby close. The crib or bassinet should basically have nothing in it except a well-fitted sheet on the mattress. And there should be no bumpers, no toys, no mobiles, nothing. Because all of these things can contribute to an increased risk for SIDS. We want a smoke-free environment. So, preferably a home where there isn't any smoking. And of course, you always want to have working smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms. And the baby can be swaddled, which we'll talk about in a little bit. If, a lot of babies like that, some babies don't like it. And so there's no right or wrong on that. There can also be in like a little sleep sack, but it's better not to have a loose blanket in the crib because again, babies can wiggle and squirm and it can get kicked around. Let's see. In terms of the temperature, people always ask like what should the temperature be and how should I dress the baby? So, you want to keep it, I say, comfortable for you and air on the slightly cooler side generally, like 68 to 72 degrees. You want to dress the baby as you would be comfortable being dressed, maybe and slightly more. And baby, you don't want to overheat the baby. Baby's hands and feet are going to be a little cool to the touch. That's normal. And that's to be expected. Okay. In terms of quantity and quality, well, that really depends on how lucky you are. Somewhat, every baby's a little different. Initially, they're knocked out. The birth is a big event for them too, and they may be sleeping most of the day, and they may have their days and nights reversed, which is always fun. So they're up all night and they're sleeping all day. So, there are things that we can advise you on how to get that transition in terms of waking the baby more frequently, maybe during the day to eat. So you can get maybe those longer stretches at night. But at the beginning, it's normal for the baby to wake up to eat every 3 to 4 hours, certainly, and sometimes more frequently. And that's fine. But fortunately, that period does not last forever. And the baby, after, the first couple of months should start to give some longer stretches. And we can talk about strategies to make that happen. I think next slide, please. Swaddling. Okay. So, babies used to being all tight, bound up in the womb. And so this sort of recreates that hugging sensation. And so a lot of babies do like to be comfy and swaddled. Some important things to know are just that you don't want to do it too tightly around the hips. You want to make sure that they have room to move the legs. Some babies like their arms inside the swaddle, and some hate it. They prefer their arms free, but they like that, hugging sensation around the body. And so that's good. And some babies just don't want the swaddle at all, and that's fine too. You can babies who like the swaddle can be swaddled usually up till around 3 months or so. After that, they're going to squirm their way out. They're going to start being too mobile. So you'll have to sort of adjust at that point if they're still using the swaddle. And I think that is it. Unless, right? Next slide is not. Yep. Okay.
Okay, next we have Dr. Lemma.
Okay, so my topic today is grooming. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about are diapers, nails, ears, the cord, circumcision, and the skin. The type of diapers that you buy is a personal choice. You can buy the cloth diapers, which are more labor intensive, or the disposable diapers. But no matter what diaper you choose, it's important to change it frequently as soon as the baby voids or poops, and clean the baby appropriately with either a washcloth with warm water. We don't like to use diaper wipes in the first couple of weeks after they're born, but after that they should be fine. But I caution you to dry the baby after you wipe them down. For the diaper area, little girls should be cleaned front to back. Again, using a mild soap. And boys, you just need to get into all the little nooks and crannies and clean them up like that. As far as a diaper cream is concerned, petroleum jelly or any ointment can provide a barrier to the skin for irritative agents such as urine can be terribly irritative, and stool as well. So the purpose of that is just to provide a barrier for the diaper, between the diaper and the skin. And then if the baby does develop a diaper rash, you can use something with zinc oxide in it. Or if it gets worse, then ask your pediatrician about recommendations for different diaper creams. We're all afraid of the nails. I mean, even I was afraid of the nails when they were born. They're tiny little fine things that can be also very sharp and kind of scratch their faces up. So, and they grow very quickly. So one of the safest things that we can do is use a baby emery board and just look at the nails like this and press the little pulp of their finger with one hand and then gently glide the emery board over the nail. Being careful, just follow the shape of the nail, trying not to create any sharp edges. If it's still a concern, you can still use those little baby mittens in the very beginning so that they don't scratch their face. Toenails grow a little slower than the fingernails, and so we don't really have to pay too much attention to the toenails. Grooming the ears is pretty simple. We don't stick anything into the ears, never, ever Q-tips. I like to tell people nothing smaller than your elbow. What we use is a washcloth that's not soppy wet with water, just damp, and just go over what you can see. You don't need to go into the ear canal, and then dry it off, and that should suffice. If baby has little flakes of wax, then just try to get the flakes of wax out. And you can do that during bath time. Bath time should be once or twice a week, and obviously the water should be warm, and you should check the water with your elbow. And bath time should probably last no longer than 5 minutes. Just get them in and get them out and dry them really well. The umbilical cord is something that can be pretty frightening in the beginning. And when they're born, a chemical is put on to help dry it up. We don't use anything else on the umbilical cord. Once they come home, it may take about a week or so for that cord to fall off. We try to keep it dry because if it gets wet, then it's going to take a longer time to fall off. So once it falls off, if you see anything that's abnormal, bring it to the attention of your pediatrician. If you see a little remnant that's left, in my day, we used to advise putting alcohol on the cord. That's no longer recommended. So your mom may say, "Oh, put some alcohol." There's no difference in the amount of time that it's going to take to fall off, and so we don't recommend the alcohol anymore. Circumcision. circumcision is a real personal matter. It's something that is popular in certain cultures. However, recently in the early 2000s, the American Academy of Pediatrics took a stand on circumcision, saying that it was beneficial for the male child. And the ways it's beneficial are a few. One is that once the skin is taken off of the head of the penis, it eliminates a place for bacteria to hide. And so it can decrease the number of urine infections in little boys, mostly under the age of 1. And then for men, it can also, it was found, decrease the incidence of sexually transmitted infections as well as HIV. And so with all that new evidence that's out there, the recommendations are such that, yes, it is beneficial, but of course it's a decision that's made within the family. And we're here to provide you with any guidance you need to make that decision for you and your son. The skin on babies, depending upon how long their gestational age is, it can vary. So if you have a baby that's post-dates, if you have a baby that's a little late, you will find that the baby's skin may be dried and cracked. And so those babies, you may want to put a little bit of Vaseline or some ointment on the cracked areas to soothe it. When we're caring for the skin after bath, you can use a little bit of a fragrance-free lotion, such as, and we're not here to promote anything, but Aquaphor is something that's used, as well as Eucerin, and you can just put it over the baby's skin. Although nothing really is necessary to put on the newborn skin, there is that option. Okay, next slide. Should I worry? Fever is a topic that can be very worrisome depending on the age of the child. So normally when the baby's born, the temperature's between about 97 and 98.8. And in the infant, we do not, fever for an infant would be 100.4 or more. So if your baby is approaching 100.4, take the clothes off the baby and cool the baby down a little bit. Maybe the baby was upset, maybe the baby's overdressed, retake the temperature in a half hour. If the temperature in the baby is still 100.4 or more, then you're going to need to seek medical advice. Never, ever, ever give your baby any aspirin. We use Tylenol or acetaminophen underneath the age of 6 months only for fever. And then after 6 months, we can use ibuprofen or Motrin or Advil. But always do that under the guidance of your pediatrician. Hiccups, what hiccups really is a contracture of the diaphragm. And so we can feel, as mothers, we can feel hiccups in the baby in utero. And this can happen as early as 6 weeks gestation, although you may not feel it, the baby can be hiccuping as early as that. And then the hiccups can last a whole year after they're born. And so they're really not worrisome, especially if there's no spinning up or vomiting associated with it. And so we don't really have to do anything for hiccups, but if we feel like we must, we can give the baby a little bit of water, maybe a pacifier to suck on, or maybe even burp the baby to help dissipate the hiccups. Periodic breathing is an entity that all newborns have, usually goes away by about 4 to 6 months of age. And so what periodic breathing is is a episode of what looks like the baby's not breathing for about 10 seconds. And then that's followed by rapid breathing. And then it may be followed by another area of no breath for another 10 seconds. That's totally normal, nothing to worry about, as long as it's not associated with any color change. So if the baby turns blue, if the baby has any change in its tone where you notice that the baby gets floppy, then that's a reason for concern, and that's no longer periodic breathing, it's something else. And so that you would need to seek advice from your pediatrician, and the baby would need to get checked. Babies are commonly born with weak eye muscles, and they can stay weak up until the age of 4 to 6 months. And so you may notice two things. One, it may look like your baby's eye is crossing, where it's actually moving in. And the other thing is something that we call pseudostrabismus, where the shape of the eye is almond shaped, so you don't really see a lot of the white of the eye, and it may look like the baby's eye is crossed. If you have any concern, bring it to the pediatrician. The pediatrician, if they think that your baby has weak eye muscles, they will refer you to the pediatric ophthalmologist, probably by 4 months of age. Next slide. Okay, visits and vaccines. Next slide. So, when do we see you in the office, and what do we do when you come to the office? So the first year is a pretty busy year for you. You're getting to know the baby, and the first month can be overwhelming. We expect to see you in the office 2 to 3 days after you're born, after the baby's born. And at that visit, it's still all about you, Mom. We want to know how you're doing with the baby, how it's affecting your life. And so our questions, aside from normal baby questions about how the baby's eating, how the baby's sleeping, will be focused more around you. There's something that we do at this visit, we do, and at every subsequent visit, it's a maternal depression screen, and you will have contact with us more than any other physician, and so it's up to us to make sure that you don't have any depression or postpartum changes that can be associated with hormones secondary to pregnancy. And so we see you on about the second day of life. We check for jaundice. We make sure the baby's feeding. We look at, aside from a physical exam, we check the weight and the height and give you some advice, and then follow up in the next week to see and to assess if the baby's eating enough and gaining appropriately. And you'll notice that we're always talking about percentiles. And so we'll plot the baby's height, weight, and head circumference on a chart to make sure the baby's growing appropriately for age. And then the 2-month visit comes, and this is when we start to introduce the immunizations. And so some other assessments that are done during every well visit is a developmental assessment to make sure that your baby is developing appropriate for age. And so we may ask you some questions, or you may see on the Freesia board some questionnaires that are that we ask you to fill out. One is the Ages and Stages questionnaire, where it will evaluate your baby's development and help us with discovering whether or not your baby has some sort of developmental issue. And then at every visit, the baby also has a nutritional assessment. So we'll ask you about feedings, about pooping and peeing, and then the vaccines occur after the physical exam. And so the vaccines that are given are the same for the 2, 4, and 6 month visit. And the baby will receive the DPT, tetanus, acellular pertussis. That is one vaccine that will take care of 3 diseases. The pertussis is the whooping cough component. And for those of you who may have questions about vaccines, unless if you've ever seen a baby have pertussis, you would never question the necessity of this vaccine. I had pertussis myself 3 years ago, and I acquired it from a 1-month-old who had pertussis, and we did not know he had pertussis. And of course, he's too young to vaccinate. And I have to tell you that as an adult, it was unbearable. I coughed incessantly for at least 100 days. I had to be out of work for a month. And so imagine a baby with a tiny, tiny airway getting this illness and coughing. It is awful and so unnecessary. And all of these diseases can be prevented with vaccines. Every one of us is an advocate for children. We're an advocate for vaccines. And so this is just a very necessary part of the visit. And then the other vaccines that are given, the polio, the HIV, which is the Haemophilus influenza, the pneumococcal vaccine, as well as the rotavirus, which is one of the live vaccines that we give. And that's an oral vaccine. So some of the side effects may be a little bit of fever, a little bit of swelling, maybe some irritability for a couple of days, but the babies usually do really well with it. And those vaccines are given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. The flu is given at 6 months of age, and if the baby or if your child is getting the flu for the first time underneath the age of 9, they get 2 flu shots, 1 initial flu shot and a booster a month later. And then the tests and screens that will occur at every visit will include what we spoke about earlier, the maternal depression screen, as well as a developmental assessment. But then we start to ask you about lead screening questions and the TB risk assessment. And at every visit, your baby will have his height measured, his weight measured, and his head circumference. They'll all be plotted, and their development as well as their growth will be discussed with you. Next slide. So I am going to hand off to Dr. Levine, who will talk about how to choose a pediatrician.
Hi. Okay. Thank you. How do you choose a pediatrician? Most of you have chosen to and found us online or somehow and joined this webinar. But if you're looking for a pediatrician, the most important thing is location. How close are you to the doctor's office? How quickly can you get there? Traveling 30, 40 minutes to go to a doctor can be difficult when you have a newborn because you're going to be going fairly often. So location is important. The other unfortunate thing that we always have to think about is insurance. Make sure that that pediatrician is taking your insurance plan. That's very important. So how do you look? Well, we do what we always do when we want to find things. We go online. We're going to look at reviews. We're going to search websites, maybe the AAP, online reviews from different sources. Remember that not all online reviews can be believed. Just like when we're choosing a restaurant, we don't believe everything we're reading. You're going to ask neighbors, you're going to ask friends. Mom groups are actually some of the best ways to find a pediatrician if you're moving to a new neighborhood or having your first baby. Also speak to your OB. Many of them have personal relationships with many of the pediatricians. So those are the ways you're going to start choosing a pediatrician. But also look at the group. Who's standing behind the group? Is it a hospital standing behind the group, or is there other pediatricians standing behind the group? Allied is a group that is run by pediatricians who are looking at what's best for the pediatrician to help best the family and the child. So those are important. The other thing, sometime in your child's life, they may need to see a specialist. Is the pediatrician beholden to a certain group or that they must refer to? Allied pediatricians are going to send you to the best that they think is for your child. The other thing is interviewing a doctor. Prior to COVID, most of us would set up appointments, bring you into our offices, have a discussion, show you our office, and see how it went. Now, some of us are doing virtual visits to our offices. We're having phone calls because we can't have more people into the offices. So don't be shy. Make the phone call. See if they're doing virtual visits. We're pediatricians. We're pretty much open to lots of different questions and requests. Next slide. COVID in the newborn. That's probably on most people's minds today. Each hospital is going to have its own rules on who's allowed into the hospital today. Partners, initially when COVID started, it was a very difficult time. Mothers were laboring and delivering alone. We've moved on from that, and partners are allowed in all hospitals. But there's not going to be a lot of visits. So just check with the hospital you're delivering at and find out what their protocols are. Each one's going to be slightly different. So you're going to go home with your newborn. Usually when you bring your newborn home, there'll be grandparents, people coming in and out to help. But now we're all afraid. Who's bringing what into our homes? If grandparents want to come and help, which is great, talk about them quarantining. Talk about them isolating prior to your delivery date. Talk about getting them tested. You got to find out what you're comfortable accepting into the bubble of your new baby. Family's going to want to come by. You're really going to have to limit who's going to come and see the baby. Before we were able to be outside, people could see the baby from a distance. It's going to get colder. It's going to be more difficult to be outside. Find out what you're comfortable with. People are coming into the house to help. Don't be afraid to ask for them to quarantine. Don't be afraid to ask, have you been tested? Have you been exposed that you know of? Where have you been? It's your baby, and we're still unsure how it's going to affect the infants. So don't be afraid to ask for things. But while we're talking about people coming in, remember, everybody who's coming to see this baby should have a flu vaccine. And as Dr. Lemma previously talked about, the Tdap vaccine. Partners should have, fathers should have Tdap vaccines. Grandparents should have Tdap vaccines. Dr. Lemma talked about her experience with pertussis. It's really important that everybody who's going to be around this baby get that Tdap vaccine as well as the flu vaccine. We don't need a twindemic, as they're saying. Okay, and it's really, remember, COVID. It's hard. It's hard for. I'm sure it was hard during your pregnancy. It's going to be hard with the newborn, but make your decisions and stick to them. Feel comfortable with what you're doing. Next slide. Self-care. Remember, you just had a baby. You need time to yourself. You need to recover. You need help. And don't be afraid to ask for it. If there are any partners who are listening too, you're going to need to step up. Moms are going to need help. If the mother had a C-section, she's not going to be able to lean over and lift that baby out of the bassinet. You're going to have to get up. You're going to have to step up. Moms, take some time for yourself. I think it's really important. You're going to need some sleep. Let others do for you. Usually we'd say, oh, have somebody come in, help you clean, help you take care of the rest of the house with the father. But that's kind of hard. But don't be afraid to have friends drop food at your door. Do whatever supermarket shopping, because if dad wants to limit his exposure, or your partner wants to limit their exposure, listen to that. Take time. Take care of yourselves. If you're not sleeping and not taking care of yourself, you're not doing the very best you can for your baby. If you're breastfeeding, remember that's basically your sole job. Take care of the baby, breastfeed, let people do everything else. If you're formula feeding, get some sleep, mom. Let your partner feed that baby in the middle of the night so you can get back to yourselves. Basically, listen to your body. Your body's going to tell you what it needs. And as Dr. Lemma also talked about, when you come to the office, we're going to be doing those self tests on depression. Be honest. We're pediatricians. We treat your children. We treat your family. We're going to, as she said, we're going to see you the most. If there's a problem, speak to the pediatrician. If you're speak to the nurses, speak to anybody in that office. We are here to help you. The other thing about self-care is right now, if you're just prep, if you haven't delivered, prep, get whatever you need into the house as quickly as you can, or put in your Amazon order and your Instacart order and get it in. Next slide. Why Allied? Allied is a physician-run organization, mainly of general pediatricians. We are totally geared to take care of children. And what's great about it is, as pediatricians, we get to talk to each other, we get to learn from each other, and that benefits our patients. We learn from each other. We have, Dr. Geller had mentioned, we have breastfeeding medicine division that can do virtual visits. We have a team that does telemedicine. Prior to COVID, we were already doing telemedicine. We were able to quickly and easily do more telemedicine. Almost all our divisions, and I be corrected if I'm wrong, I think all of the divisions are doing telemedicine now. So you don't always have to come into the office. So much can be done by telemedicine. We have an asthma education team, which not only is great for if your child should have some asthma, but for the family as well. It's a team approach. We work together. We work together for the benefit of your child. As a pediatrician, it's been a great place to work. But even so, I think it just helps us as pediatricians give better care to children. We're here for you. We're family-centered. We're children-centered. And we are all about being pediatricians. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levine, Dr. Lemma, Dr. Geller. It's always interesting to hear how everybody answers these questions and presents. And I realize some of the stuff that I learned that just comes back, that, we all kind of learned the same little tidbits. And I don't know that we actually learned them officially in a book, but this is almost like folklore that's passed down, from one pediatrician to the next. We've tried to cover a lot of things tonight. I wanted to get back to the concept of fever in a newborn. So Dr. Levine, can you just talk about how often should a parent take the temperature in their newborn? And then also Tylenol was mentioned. Where does that fit in?
Unmute yourself.
I got to unmute myself. My philosophy is I don't think parents should be taking the temperature on a regular basis. You're going to get to know your baby. You're going to know if it feels warm, feels cold, or has a different cry. Those are reasons to take temperatures. The baby eating less or not eating at all. those are the reasons to take a temperature. Tylenol or acetaminophen is given when there's fever. There's nothing wrong with fever. Fever is the body's reaction to help fight whatever infection or whatever is going on in our bodies. So I would never recommend a child 2 months of age getting Tylenol before you speak to your doctor. There's just no way around it. And as Dr. Lemma has, fever 100.4 or greater is a fever and is a reason to speak to your doctor.
Right, and that's a rectal temperature, right? People should understand that in infants under 6 months age, for sure, don't use the ear thermometer. Certainly don't use the pacifier thermometers. Don't use the infrared scanners. You really need a rectal temperature. If you want to do a temperature under the armpit and add a degree to get a sense of it, you can do that. But especially under 2 months, if that baby has 100.4, you're probably going back to the hospital. Not because the fever itself is dangerous, but there are certain infections the baby could get coming out of the womb. So again, you're not going to make these decisions on your own. You're going to absolutely contact your pediatrician who will guide you. But fever in a newborn is something that we definitely want to pay attention to. Dr. Lemma, interesting. You mentioned an umbilical cord chemical. So that shows the difference in how things go on the hospitals that I go to. Nobody uses an umbilical cord chemical anymore.
They still use the blue dye over at Rumsey.
Yeah, they don't use it anymore at Northwell, any of the Northwell hospitals or Winthrop. So that's just
interesting.
Right? They say that medicine is an art and science, right? So some of it's science, some of it's art. We're seeing that play out in COVID also, right? Masks and other things. We learn as we go. We make changes as we go. So, Dr. Lemma, you also mentioned the Freesia Pads. I just wanted to tell everybody what Freesia is. So Freesia is a check-in system that Allied Physicians Group uses. We are able to send all the check-in information, including all the surveys, to your phone, which has been really great during COVID, so you don't have to touch anything that anybody else has touched, and we're able to get all this information before you even walk in. Postpartum depression has come up a few times. We talk about it as being hormonal, but we know that even dads can get postpartum depression, and as well as people who adopt, and you know, all of those. So Dr. Geller, do you want to talk a little bit about postpartum depression? And what
sure.
And maybe the baby blues and stuff like that.
So, you know, for the mother, you have gone through a major experience, whether it's a vaginal delivery or a C-section. It's a huge process to go through. And your body is changing as it changed during pregnancy. It's changing after pregnancy. And that includes a lot of hormonal changes. You're also tired and you have this new baby and it's exciting, but also a little scary sometimes. And so it is normal to have what we call some amount of baby blues, which is just, you know, I'm a little stressed, or I might cry at a sad commercial or things like that. And that is normal. And that's when, you know, you look to your partner, your support system for some help, to take a little break, maybe take a nap. We expect that, but that passes and it shouldn't be so severe. Postpartum depression is a more serious issue, or it can be. It would really show signs of depression. You're sad most of the time. Maybe you're not feeling bonded to the baby. Maybe you're just, you know, you have no appetite. You're just, you don't have any hope that things are going to get easier, and they will get easier. You know, the newborn period is hard, but it doesn't last forever. So those are the things that we screen for. And if it's a concern, then there are resources that we can direct you towards to get that appropriate help. It's not good to ignore it. As we've all stated tonight, The most important thing you can do for your baby is take care of yourself. A happy, well-functioning mother is essential for the baby to thrive. So again, it's not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. And it's definitely something to talk about if you're feeling it.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Lemma, can you talk a little bit about spitting up? We get lots of questions about that. How do you know when it's too much, and when is it going to stop?
So the baby, how do we know it's too much? Well, the one thing that we do is we measure weight gain. So if the baby is not gaining weight, then obviously it's too much. Normal spit up does not interfere with the baby's well-being. So as long as your baby is comfortable and is eating well and is gaining weight, there's usually no reason for concern. So if that is associated, if spitting up is associated with irritability, or if it's associated with decreased feeding, or actual vomiting, then that's not normal spitting up. And so that would be something to bring to the attention of your pediatrician. There may be some other indications, something else going on, especially if the spit up is very forceful. And obviously spit up should never be any color, it should be normal food color. If we have green spit up, that's not normal spit up, and that needs to be addressed. Usually spit up will go away when the baby is starting to eat solids. So usually about 6 months of age, we should start to see the baby decrease the spit up. And this happens for a couple of reasons. The junction between the stomach and the esophagus is a little immature initially, so food may come up, and because the baby's always lying down. At about 6 months of age, we start to see the baby sit up more, and so the spit up should be less.
Great, thank you. Dr. Levine, Dr. Lemma mentioned the difference between vomiting and spitting up. Can you tell us what that difference is?
Sometimes it's a very difficult distinction to make. When the baby spits up, what it's spitting up looks like triple the volume of what it actually is. So if the baby eats 3 ounces and spits up, if it's spitting up a half an ounce, it may look like 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces. So it seems a lot. Usually, if the baby spits up, the baby's not going to be hungry afterwards. If the baby's really vomiting, you're going to notice that the baby's going to be hungry sooner. Difficult distinction. It's a great question to ask your pediatrician. If the babies are vomiting a lot, the babies will tend to lose weight. And that's one of the reasons we're going to say, you're going to need to come in. Let's get a weight on the baby. Let's take a look at this baby. Also, we're going to ask you about wet diapers. If the baby's vomiting a lot, there's going to be a reduction in the wet diapers. If the babies are just spitting up a lot, probably not going to have those issues. So it's a difficult thing to pick up, but it's a conversation and discussion to have with your pediatrician. And we're going to ask you lots of different questions about the baby, not just about the spit up, so we can get a better idea of what the picture is. Many times a telehealth visit is really good. We can get our eyes on the baby and say, it may just be spitting up. But it's hard. It's not easy. It's not easy for pediatricians sometimes from the history, and it's definitely very difficult for parents. So don't be concerned to make the phone call, put in an email, ask us. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I think you're showing that getting a good relationship with your pediatrician, that's one of the main reasons to interview a pediatrician, is just to get the sense that, you can talk to them. I'll tell you one of the distinctions that I use between vomiting and spitting up is that spitting up is a passive process, right? So it just kind of flies out of their mouth. It could go across the room, like force, that doesn't really matter, but they're looking around, they're happy. Vomiting is reverse peristalsis. It's like, you see it happening, and then oftentimes the baby's upset. So that's kind of I think an easy way for parents to decide, so they don't have to call me every time the baby spits up, how it's going. Dr. Geller, so we have a question about vaccines. So since all of us are, staying inside and there's much less exposure, do we really have to vaccinate the babies on time? Can we wait a little bit longer? And the same thing with flu, which Dr. Lanid kind of mentioned a little bit, but do I really have to do a flu vaccine this year if none of us are going anywhere? So Dr. Geller, you want to take that one?
Yeah, listen, I mean, this is a very interesting situation we're all in this year. We're sort of wondering ourselves what this year's flu season is going to be. But the one thing we do know is that the vaccines are safe and effective, and they're the best defense we have against these very serious, scary illnesses. And it is one of the most important things you can do for your baby to protect them. You can't live in a bubble. No matter the precautions you're taking, it's impossible. Germs will get to you somehow. And we need to make sure that none of the germs that are getting to us and our babies are going to really significantly impact their health in a negative way. The keeping up with regular checkup appointments, even during the pandemic, is vital. We don't want to ignore preventative care. We don't want to skip visits where we can't monitor their growth, their development, and keep them up to date with immunizations. As you see with COVID, you never know what's coming down the pike, and it's best to get the baby protected as soon as we can.
Agree 100%. And even when in April and May, when everything shut down, the checkups that we kept seeing were the newborns.
Yes.
Right. And what's so interesting is back in August, when nobody was going anywhere, we were still having toddlers with fever.
Oh yeah.
And nobody knew where they got them from,
Yeah.
but it happened. So there is a question here I just want to get to, and then I guess we're going to be done. Somebody asked if we're going to email this out, and I meant to answer them, but I hit answer live. So yes, we are going to email this out to everybody. Somebody talks about a 1-week-old who was born maybe a little early at 37 and a half weeks, and when can they let the baby sleep through the night? So, Dr. Geller, I'll let you take this. Just in general, when can we stop feeding the baby every 3 to 4 hours in the middle of the night?
Right. So, again, like I said earlier, every baby is unique and different. And so a lot of factors are going to come into play. How, you mentioned, was the baby a little premature? How's the baby's growth been? What is the baby eating? How much do they take? And how's the trajectory of their weight gain? And this is something we're going to talk about at every visit. We're going to talk about what we can be expecting reasonably in terms of sleeping. Usually by 3 months, you can expect a baby to be able to give you a decent stretch of sleep. That doesn't mean 12 hours necessarily, unless, like I said before, unless you're super lucky. But it might be a good, 5 to 6 hour stretch, and that can be excellent. But we're not going to talk about sleep training until, my personal recommendation is that the 4-month visit. Some people will do it earlier. And again, it really depends on the situation. But the main thing to know is for the newborn period, we feed the baby when the baby's hungry. And then as we see the baby growing and developing, we can discuss what to expect from sleep.
Right. And once the baby is back to birth weight, though, we can let the baby go longer than 4 hours if the baby wants to.
Yes, certainly. And that's something we'll discuss at each visit as well. Initially, we may say, you got to wake up the baby hasn't gained weight don't let the baby go more than 3 to 4 hours. And then once the baby is thriving, they'll say, oh, do I need to wake the baby up? And I'll say, oh no, do not wake that baby up.
right? It's the first thing I taught my 4-year-olds when I had a baby was never wake a sleeping baby. So
Right.
I want to end this with one question because we're really on the hour mark. Somebody talked about being due around December and what to do about the holidays and avoiding large family gatherings. And I really want to make a plea to everybody here. Think very carefully about who you're going to be with for Thanksgiving. We are paying the price for Halloween gatherings because apparently it's really very important that our children have to stand near other children to get treats dressed up in costumes. And the rates are going up, and some of our school districts are closed directly because of Halloween parties that were had by young kids and by teenagers. Thanksgiving, you know, we want to be together with our family. We want to be back to normal, but the more people you're with, the greater your chance that somebody at that gathering is going to be positive, especially as rates all around us go up. So I'm going to ask everybody to think very carefully before you go outside your immediate family for Thanksgiving. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
I mean, I would just say normally with a newborn, even if it's not a pandemic, I recommend minimizing the baby's exposure to groups of people for the first 6 weeks at least. So even more so this year, I would say if you have a newborn, you know, a big gathering is not in your best interest this year.
I think that you got to think about the consequences, you know, so if you bring a baby to a gathering, like you said, Adina, and the baby gets fever, that baby has to be re-hospitalized. And you know, some of the ages can vary at what age, but definitely underneath the age of 6 weeks, 2 months of fever, that baby has to go into the hospital and get a full sepsis workup, which includes a spinal tap. And the only person that's going to be with that baby is the mother and the father. And so you're not going to see any of these other people who will want you over their house. It's going to be the two of you in the hospital with the baby. And so, I mean, for me, this is the bottom line. You don't want to be re-hospitalized. You don't want your baby to get sick. And so the way we can do that is by minimizing risk and minimize risk by minimizing gatherings.
I just want to add one thing. I often will tell parents of newborns to blame me. They're getting pressure from family to, you know, do things that I don't recommend and that they are not comfortable with. I will say, tell them I said you can't do it. Blame it on the doctor. I'm fine with that.
Right.
Broad shoulders we have.
Yeah.
Dr. Dean, you want to give us any parting words?
The one thing
about anything.
I just wanted to add that if we're recommending not going to these large gatherings with your infant, but don't have one parent go to the large gatherings, because if there's somebody there, you're going to bring it home to the infant. Enjoy being a single family unit for this holiday season. And next year, hopefully, we will be able to have a bigger celebration with our extended family and friends.
And even if all you come home with is a cold, think about how you're going to feel when you get that stuffy nose or you start to cough, how nervous it is, who's going to have to get COVID tested, who's going to have to quarantine until you get tests back. It's really just not worth it.
Right.
So Bree, anything that I missed as we went around?
No, that's really it. I just wanted to let everybody know that coming up on November 24th, we have a sleep webinar. So all your questions about sleep with a newborn, come join us. We will send out the link tomorrow with the link to this recorded webinar. We want to thank all the attendees for joining us this evening, and a very, very special thank you to our allied trusted pediatricians for always guiding us in the right direction. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.